The NHS staff survey published yesterday shows that 9 out of 10 junior doctors already work extra hours beyond their normal contract. The survey also showed falling morale amongst this vital group of staff. What does the Prime Minister think the Health Secretary's veto of a deal and imposition of a contract will do to their morale?
Well, first of all, the Health Secretary did not veto a deal. What we've had is for 4 years discussions about how important it is to have an NHS that works on a more 7-day basis. But let me pay tribute to the fact that so many in the NHS work so hard already at the weekends. But what matters is making sure we can have a genuine 7-day NHS. And what I'd say to junior doctors is that no junior doctor working legal hours will receive a pay cut. This contract will not impose longer hours. In fact, it has tougher safeguards to make sure it reduces the hours that are worked. We're not seeking to save money from the new contract, and nights and Saturday evenings and Sundays continue to attract unsocial hours payments. This is a good deal from a government that is putting £10 billion more into our NHS.
Corbyn! Mr. Speaker, this dispute with the junior doctors has been on the basis of misrepresented research about weekend mortality. I'll read the Prime Minister what the researchers themselves say, and I quote, "It is not possible to ascertain the extent to which these excess deaths may be preventable. To assume they are avoidable would be rash and misleading." So is the Prime Minister and his Health Secretary being rash and misleading with these figures?
Let me agree with the right honourable gentleman about something, which is this dispute has been plagued by scaremongering and inaccurate statistics. The British Medical Association, in their first intervention, said that this was a 30% pay cut. That was completely untrue. In fact, it was so untrue that they had to take their pay calculator off their website and they never put it back up again. Now let me answer very directly the question about excess deaths. The 6,000 figure for excess deaths was based on a question asked by the Health Secretary to Sir Bruce Keogh, the medical director of the NHS. Now we've had time to go into these figures in more detail. I can tell the House this, that the Health Secretary was indeed guilty. He was guilty of an understatement. The true figures for excess deaths at the weekend are 11,000, not 6,000. So perhaps the right honourable gentleman will now withdraw his totally unjustified attack on the Health Secretary. Will he withdraw it now he knows the figures?
Mr. Speaker, it's just worth reflecting for one moment. There is no dispute with the junior doctors in Scotland or in Wales because their governments have had the sense to reach an agreement with the junior doctors. He must also be aware that the vast majority of the public of England are on the side of the junior doctors, not the Secretary of State. But the situation actually gets worse, Mr. Speaker. A Freedom of Information request by the BBC today reveals that when asked for the source of the Health Secretary's statistics, civil servants in the Department of Health decided to, and I quote, offer up the most bland statement possible that would neither confirm nor contradict the Health Secretary's statement. Isn't it time that the Prime Minister and the Health Secretary actually apologise for what they've done and correct these statements and, indeed, while they're about it, reach an honourable settlement with the junior doctors?
I think that the best can be said there is he wrote that question before he heard my answer. I've given the fullest possible description of how the figure for 6,000 excess deaths was arrived at, and now the true figure being 11,000. But I note that there's absolutely no withdrawal of his accusation against the Health Secretary, even after he gets those figures. Now, he says there's no dispute in Scotland and Wales with the junior doctors. Well, the reason for that is in Scotland and Wales, they are not trying to create more of a 7-day NHS. Now, that 7-day NHS was not only in our manifesto, because I want want to make sure that hard-working people can access health services at an equal rate right through the week, because you don't just get ill in the weekdays. But also, if he reads his own party's report into their election defeat, they admit that the concept of a 7-day NHS was a very popular concept, and it is. So what I would say to him is, you can see in England we are putting £10 billion more into the NHS. We've got 10,000 more doctors, we've got 10,000 more nurses, we're treating more patients, we now have a settlement of the GP contract, we have a settlement now of the junior doctors contract. We are building a strong NHS for patients, and that's what this is about.
Mr. Speaker, we all want a strong and successful NHS. You don't achieve that by provoking industrial action, misrepresenting research, or failing to get a grip on the cost of agency staff in the NHS, which now amounts to £4 billion. Indeed, in the Prime Minister's own local NHS trust, it's overspent on staffing costs by £11 million this year, yet has managed to spend £30 million on agency staff. Will the chair of the Oxford anti-austerity campaign be writing another letter to himself, asking his local, asking on behalf of his constituents for the Health Secretary to intervene and support his local NHS?
I'm very proud of the NHS in Oxfordshire and everyone who works in it. And having met recently with the head of the Oxford Radcliffe Trust, I know that he supports this move towards more 7-day services. That's absolutely vital. Ask my mother. Oh, I think I know what my mother would say. I think she'd look across the dispatch box and she'd say, put on a proper suit, do up your tie, and sing the national anthem.
Mr. Speaker, if we're talking of motherly advice, my late mother would have said, stand up for the principle of a health service free at the point of use for everybody. Because that's what she dedicated her life to, as did many of her generation. Mr. Speaker, we are 3/4 of the way past into this financial year. The NHS deficit is already £2.26 billion. 53% of NHS Trust finance directors say the quality of care in their local area has worsened in this year. What will the deficit be by the end of next month?
We will get deficits down because we're clamping down on the staffing agencies, on expensive management consultants, and introducing better public procurement. But the Honourable Gentleman has to recognise this. We said that we would back the Simon-Stevens plan, which means at least £8 billion more into the NHS, although we put £10 billion more into the NHS. At the last election and subsequently, Labour have refused to back that extra money. And so when you look at the NHS today, and my mother is equally proud of the NHS as I am, and I know she would be pleased to know 1.9 million more people going to A&E, 1.6 million more operations, 10,700 more doctors, 11,800 more nurses. And I have to say, I think if Nye Bevan was here today, he'd want a 7-day NHS because he knew the NHS was for patients up and down our country.
Nye Bevan would be turning in his grave if he could hear the Prime Minister's attitude towards the NHS. He was a man with vision. He was a man with vision who wanted a health service for the good of all. I tell you, Mr. Speaker, our health service is run by brilliant people. Brilliant doctors, brilliant nurses, brilliant staff. But I've got a question for the Prime Minister from one of those brilliant doctors. His name is Ashraf. And he sent me a question saying this: as a doctor, I know full well the stresses on the NHS and the shortcomings. We already have a 7-day emergency service here. How does increasing elective work improve safety at the weekend? If a truly 7-day NHS is wanted, we need more nurses, more admin staff, more porters, radiographers, physios, all the other vital workers. Will the Prime Minister now, today, commit to publishing the Department of Health's analysis of the real cost of introducing a 7-day NHS, and will he be prepared to pay for it rather than picking a fight with the junior doctors who want to deliver it?
What I think is not clear is whether or not Labour support a 7-day NHS or not. Now, we do support a 7-day NHS, and that is why we're putting in the £10 billion. That's why we're putting in 10,000 more doctors, putting in 11,000 more nurses, and crucially, yes, that is why we are looking at the contracts in the NHS to make sure it can work on a more 7-day basis. Now, the truth is this. You can go to hospitals today in our country, like the Salford Royal in the northwest of England, where they're already operating on a 7-day basis within the existing budgets. Now, this is good because they're using all their equipment on a 7-day basis. They're carrying out consultations 7 days of the week. They carry out some operations 7 days a week. That actually is good for the hospital, good for the staff working in it, and above all, it's good for patients. We don't just get ill on Monday to Friday. I want a world-class NHS. We are funding a world-class NHS. We've got world-class people working in our NHS, and together we're going to build that 7-day NHS.